Hello, everyone, and welcome back to OneSoccer. I'm your host for today, Josh Deming. I'm joined by my colleague, Alex Gangue-Ruzic, and our special guest, Sam Stokes from Yank Report. Today, gentlemen, we are going to take a look at the upcoming Gold Cup, take a look at several different squads, but mainly focus on the USA and, of course, Canada. But first things first, Sam, I appreciate the time and welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much. I was excited whenever you reached out, man. I've never really done been on an opposition show. It's usually all about the U.S. all the time. So I'm excited to get some perspectives outside of the USA and hear what you crazy cats from the North have to say about things.
Crazy cats from the north. I like the way you put it. But I guess first thing is first. Also, congratulations on obviously lifting the Concacaf Nations League. Unfortunately for Alex and I, it was a bitter pill to swallow. But at the end of the day, it was a little bit of a wake-up call, showing just maybe the quality that the U.S. had. I know that we had the better of you guys over the World Cup qualifying, but I don't think there's any debate that you guys truly deserve that victory.
Yeah, I don't know why you're congratulating me. I didn't have a whole lot to do with it. I pretty much sat on my couch during the thing. But yeah, the U.S. does appear to be head and shoulders above the rest of CONCACAF right now. And that seems to be sending some shockwaves down south in Mexico. But I'm sure we'll get into that in a bit.
Head and shoulders hurt a little bit, but we're gonna roll on. So next up, the nice thing for Canada is that there is a tournament right around the corner. Now we can debate, and I think that we will. Is it going to mean the same thing? I think Alex and I can probably say for Canada it'll mean the same thing because we haven't lifted a trophy since 2000, and I would love the opportunity to potentially do it again. But Sam, what is the perspective from the U.S. side? Because you guys obviously sent your A squad. This is back-to-back Gold Cups now. You'll be sending B/C squads. What do you think it would mean to you guys to win it again? And if you don't win it, is it kind of like, well, we didn't send our best. It's not that big of a deal. What's the mindset around the U.S. fan perspective right now?
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. I think this is just kind of an experimental group. It's always difficult to kind of figure out what exactly you should be taking out of this or what exactly you should be expecting going in. I think in the previous Gold Cup, it was kind of setting the tone for World Cup qualifying and kind of getting a taste of what we might see in World Cup qualifying, although we didn't have the squad. But it did kind of give that emotional energy to start the qualification cycle. And I guess it was training for the coaching staff and some of the players who filled in. Because it always seems like even though it's a B squad or a C squad or whatever you want to call it, there are players that are going to emerge from this group and impact the senior team somewhere, some way. And that's what I always get excited about. I'm always excited about the down roster battles, positional battles. Who's going to win between like our fourth and fifth winger, or our sixth and seventh center back? Who's going to come out ahead? If there's a young player who's kind of getting their first opportunity with the national team, what are they going to look like in that situation? Even though it's kind of like even though the U.S. isn't sitting their top roster and Canada is missing some of their top guys, and that can be said for a lot of the teams in the Gold Cup, it's still decent competition and it's still international competition. And for a lot of these young players who either don't get a ton of caps or getting their debuts, it's still going to be an opportunity for them to represent their national team. They're still going to get those jitters. They're still going to get that experience of a big international tournament. So there's still a lot to take away from that. As far as what are fans going to take away from the U.S., I think in the U.S. we have an expectation to show well in these tournaments. We certainly don't want to fall out in the group stage. I think in the last tournament, there was an expectation for us to basically get out of the group, and that was about it. I think it's fair to say in the last tournament, the U.S. Got the benefit of some bounces and got the benefit of a defense and Matt Turner, who just refused to let any shots on goal, much less goals in the back of the net. So that helped out a lot of the shortcomings as far as putting goals into the opposition net. So I think there's an expectation to play good defense for sure and kind of hope for the best once we get to the group stage, especially considering some of the quality of some of the rosters that some of the other nations are bringing in.
Now, Sam, you're definitely speaking Alex's language because I agree. When I looked at the 2021 Gold Cup from the U.S., because I watched every one of your games as well, you saw players take a big step up to the national team. You said Matt Turner, Miles Robinson was one, Zimmerman was one. I'm sure that there's more just off the top of my head, but Canada did the same thing. Maxime Crépeau had a huge tournament, Alistair Johnson, Tajon Buchanan, Stephanie Eustachio. So, Alex, I guess I know you agree with Sam, but you want to elaborate why you think maybe it's important for some players who I know like the big six for Canada aren't at this tournament, but there's a huge opportunity for other players to step up on both sides, whether it's US and Canada, right?
Yeah, I think this has to be a developmental tournament really for Canada, just because it's a chance to, Canada did get the fortune of a bit of an easier group, so that's a time to experiment and get some new players on the field, and then from there in those bigger knockout games, it's a chance to forge and get that experience. Obviously, assuming that you make it that far, because I mean, look, the goal is to win a trophy. Let's not kid ourselves. I think it would be huge for the program, but at the same time, if you do win a trophy, I think the big value of winning a trophy and why winning Nations League was so important is that in a final, you got guys like Davies, David, Kone, Buchanan all out there together and getting that experience of winning. And I do think one unfortunate reality is if you do win this Gold Cup, those guys aren't there. And I think those are the guys that would benefit a lot from that experience, even though they've won it, at club level before. They just need to get that taste of winning for country. But certainly the rest of those guys, like Eustachio, if he has a phenomenal tournament again, like he did in 2021 and leads Canada, that will be, just further cement his status as, Canada's arguably most important player. And then from there, it'll be key to get all these guys to step up, because we know what Canada needs now. After seeing the World Cup, after seeing this Nations League final, we know that Canada needs to figure out its defensive configuration, needs to figure out how to get Davies on the ball more in dangerous areas. How do you get Jonathan David touches in big games? How do you get Kone and Eustachio higher up the field? So now from there, it's okay, how do you find those players that will help them do that? Who are the center backs? Who are the goalkeepers? Who are the defensive midfielder that they've been missing? What's the solution up front? And I think hopefully this Gold Cup can also answer those questions while pushing for a trophy.
Now, Sam, I have a fun question for you, because back in 2021, I remember when the USA released their squad, a lot of Canadians looked at it being like, all right, we have a good chance. And that's the beautiful thing. We're not very familiar with maybe a bulk of like the talent that you guys have in the MLS. I think this is kind of a similar roster. I think a lot of the Canadians are definitely more familiar with you guys as players. The big names obviously aren't there. It's very strong. But when you guys looked at our Gold Cup squad, I mean, originally back in 2021, we had Davies and Laren and like some big players in it. Davies obviously didn't feature. Jonathan David wasn't there. But what was your thought when you saw Canada's roster here? Because again, I think a lot of times when it comes to Canada's roster, when you're looking at it from different nations, they only really see Davies. And then after that, they take a look at David, Laren, and then you have Buchanan, Kone. Those five big guys are not there. Alistair Johnson as well. So when you took a look at our roster, did you see that those guys aren't there and be like, this is as B squad as it gets? Or do you still maybe recognize that there's still a lot of talent in this side and they can be ones to potentially watch out for?
Oh, I looked at it exactly like you said. I just checked to see if the big guys were there, and if they're not there, that means the U.S. has a shot in this. I was wondering how some of these other nations were going to approach it. Seeing that Canada's not taking their big guys, that means it's wide open. I think if you guys would have brought your A squad, you would probably be the favorites for this Gold Cup. I mean, Jamaica's out there, and I'm sure we'll touch on that in a second. But seeing that those guys aren't there, it's wide open for all of us. I'm curious to see what Canada has as far as depth, because I know, similar to the U.S., that Canada is developing a ton of young players in some of these MLS academies as well, and also benefiting from dual internationals. So to see what you guys have in store, if the Big Six is a golden generation type thing, or if there's more in store for Canada, if this is a long-term project and we're going to see more of these top end players like Davies down the road. So I think that's, in my perspective, that's what the Gold Cup is for. I know some of these nations are viewing it differently.
No, I think it's fair, and that's what all the Canadians I would say out there, and probably you would say for the Americans as well, is keep an eye on some of these guys, because the opportunity is there, and history has shown that if you have a good Gold Cup, you can take that big step and potentially become a big player for the national team. But if we are looking over at favorites now, Alex, I was very surprised when I saw, especially Jamaica's roster. Mexico, we know, usually send pretty close to an A squad, but out of Mexico and Jamaica, which one are you a little bit more worried for? I mean, I guess maybe it would be Jamaica, because if Canada finished first, we'll play the second place team, I believe, from the US's group. So it'll be maybe USA or Jamaica. So what was your thoughts when you saw the Mexico squad and the Jamaica squad?
Yeah, I think it was, impressive to see. And I think it kind of shows where both federations are at. I think to start with Mexico, this is a rough time, right? They've lost 3 consecutive trophy opportunities at the hands of, the US each time they were eliminated. That's their rival, that's their neighbor. And you could see how frustrated they were in that loss in the Nations League semifinals, and, all the turmoil off the field. another coach gone in Diego Coca. You add also as well just some of the behavior off the field, the bad, ticket sales. Like, it's just not going well for Mexico right now. They need any sort of good vibes. Heck, even at the World Cup, where they were guaranteed a round of 16, and they had the 5th game curse, but they're always at least making out of their group. They didn't even do that at the last World Cup. So it just feels like every metric possible, youth tournaments, it's trending downwards in Mexico right now. They just need any sort of good vibe to pick things up, and that's why they've sent a strong team. And I think that's it makes sense. I think a win would get things back on track and realize, okay, not everything is terrible. Okay, Mexico can still dominate this tournament, can maybe hit a bit of a reset button. They have this next cycle with no qualifiers to completely reset everything so that they show well at home in 2026. As for Jamaica, I think they really want to prove that, look, amongst those teams that aren't going to be there in the qualifiers, Canada, US, and Mexico, it's kind of wide open. Panama, I'd argue, leads the race based on what they've seen in terms of consistency. Teams like Curacao and Suriname could pop off out of nowhere, although the fact they both didn't make the Gold Cup was a huge upset for the pair of them. Honduras is always going to be a threat. El Salvador is building a fascinating project, but Jamaica on paper is better than all of those teams. And I think they need to now prove that by having, a strong tournament and use that momentum to go into qualifiers. So the commitments have been there for a while with Jamaica. Like, you can't say this is out of nowhere. Michael Antonio's been with them since 2021 now already. Guy like Damari Gray comes in, Leon Bailey's there. Like, they've got the talent. So now it's just, they need a moment to put it all together to show that chemistry, because they've had some issues off the field and other issues that have hampered their chemistry. If they can have a good tournament and put that all together, they can show that, look, like, in terms of this next qualifying cycle, Jamaica can be that next top team and push into that top 4 with Canada, Mexico, US.
Yeah, the federation there in Jamaica has had some issues. I remember the hype going into World Cup qualifying with a lot of the dual nationals that they were picking up, and they really had a bust of a campaign. And of course, maybe some coaching, a better coach maybe coming could do something. But Sam, is there anything you want to add to that conversation, or maybe a favorite that you could see emerging? Is it Jamaica because of that roster, Mexico because of the history, USA defending champs? What do you think?
Yeah, I think I like what Alex said a lot about strong on paper, and I think that's sort of been representative of what we've been hearing about Jamaica for a while now. Like you said, at the beginning of World Cup qualifying, everybody was saying, look out for Jamaica, look out for Jamaica. They have all these dual internationals that they could bring in and potentially make a real run at this thing. And we didn't see that. In fact, we saw a lot of infighting, issues with the federation, issues within the squad between the what would you call them, the dual internationals and the whatever you want to call
homegrown players. Yeah,
whatever you want to say. It seemed like there was issues within the squad. I think that came out in a documentary for everybody to see. Just tremendous issues with the federation and some of the things happening behind the scenes. So for me, Jamaica's always been like, I want to see it. Show it to me. Like, I understand that you guys have all this talent on paper, but I want to see it out there on the field. And then you kind of look at the squad, and it's they'll be able to put together a really strong 11. You start to question some of the depth options that they have on the field. And considering some of the ages of some of these players, you wonder, is a strong 11 going to be enough whenever you get into the group stage and beyond? I think we saw with the U.S. at the World Cup, the U.S. was able to put a really strong 11 on the field. The U.S. probably had a strong 12, 13, 14 players. But once we got into the group stages, it got later on in the tournament, all those miles and all those legs really crept up on the squad, and the lack of depth really did the U.S. in. And you start to wonder, Jamaica, what's going to happen there with some of these players that a lot of them are playing in Europe, so they're still in preseason mode. They're not in midseason form. Are they going to have the gas in the tank in order to really go far in this tournament and get into some of these wars, which inevitably they're going to get into, because you're talking about some really disciplined teams that they're going to have to go up against as they go on throughout this tournament. So are they going to have that gas in the tank in order to do it? I want to see it, because I've just been hearing about it from Jamaica for so long. Mexico, they're desperate for a tournament. They have to win a tournament. Their fan base is killing them right now. I mean, if you saw the third place game for Mexico and the turnout in the stadium, and just the way that their fans kind of treated the team during that game, the way that the fans treated the team in the USA versus Mexico semifinal, whenever they started doing olays for the U.S. squad and started booing the Mexican players, there's some real animosity out there. It seems like all the way down from the federation to the players to the fan base, they're looking for answers, they're looking for hope. And I think that a win in the Gold Cup would go a long way to getting those butts back in the seats and making that fan base believe. But I think it's going to be an uphill battle right now, man. I think CONCACAF's only getting better, and there's some tough teams in this competition. So we'll see how it plays out. I'm really excited about this competition.
I am too, and you made a very good point there about Mexico, and I want to elaborate a little bit, but the fans basically did not want Diego Coca there. He was sacked. They brought in Jimmy Lozano, a very young Mexican coach. This is who the fans want. I think that takes a little bit of the pressure off of Mexico, just a touch, because they got the man in. There's no reason he should come in and be not that it should be expected to win it, but Diego Coca had to win it. There was debate whether he'd even be there for it. He's not there for it, so I do like that point, and I like the appointment there, because if he goes on and does have a successful Gold Cup and gets Mexico maybe to where they need to be, maybe he gets that job permanently. But also, speaking of what you said, Sam, about depth, I think it's funny because, Alex, if you remember back to 2021, we had Kyle Larin in the Gold Cup, which was fantastic, but obviously he went out injured. Cavallini was our backup piece there. He got suspended. All of a sudden, we have Akindelli starting the semifinal match deep into the tournament, and it just wasn't there. I know the big issue, the big pressing question I think Canadians are going to have when looking at this Gold Cup squad is where the goal is going to come from. Maybe who's going to start, if it's that either the lone striker or the front two. What would you say to maybe calm some of the nerves that this group can produce and find the back of the net? And who are you expecting to be maybe the leading man or the leading duo up front?
Yeah, I mean, it is a great question in terms of, names you're used to seeing. You don't see David, you don't see Larin. Heck, a guy like Ike Ugbo would have been someone where, he scored in the top 5 leagues before. So you'd at least, have that familiarity. But, there's still some options up front. I think Charles Andreas Brim is primed to have a very big tournament. I think he was, dominant in the Dutch second division. He had that taste of the Eredivisie last year. He should be heading back this year. This is a tournament where if you can give him some minutes and just keep that confidence going, he's familiar with Canada's system. He's been in and out of the camps for 4 years now, right? Like, he's familiar to John Herdman's system. So he's someone I'd be keeping a close eye on. Look, Lucas Cavallini, he's very, he's going to split opinion, but he's a guy who's scored goals for Canada. We have to remember he's in the top 10, top 5 of the all-time goal scoring list. He will step up and chip in goals when he's on the field, if you can get him that service. So that could be a starting pair. From there, there's good depth options, right? Jason Russell-Rowe has the upside and proven with Columbus that he can make things happen in short spurts, and maybe it starts off the bench for Canada and he grows in to the tournament, given that he's still so young, only just turned 20 last fall. And then from there, guys like Junior Hoylett can chip in. Jacob Staffelbrig's been scoring goals with Nashville, and he's someone who gives Canada a bit of a different profile up front, just in terms of that speed and that willingness to run and to press and to get in behind. So there are options there. Look, it's not a David Larin or any of these guys that are playing in those top leagues that you're going to know of, but there's a good mix of guys with upside, like Brims and Schaffelbergs and Russell Rose, and guys like Cavallini, who might not be the most spectacular, but he's put goals in the net for Canada before.
Now, that was my big question for Alex surrounding Canada. Sam, I have a big question for you surrounding the U.S. I think you know probably where I'm going, but I want to hear just a little bit about your thoughts on Greg coming back. But then I also want to hear about the impressive work that you maybe thought that BJ did during his time in the Nations League. And do you expect this U.S. squad to play the same kind of way? Not that 4-3-3, very kind of outside focus, but that free-flowing 4-2-3-1, maybe Jordy Mihailovic is that guy to maybe play in the Geo role. Are you expecting that a similar style for this Gold Cup, or do you think with Greg coming back in, maybe he's in BJ's ear, that 4-3-3 comes back? What are your thoughts?
The Greg Berhalter conversation has just dominated so much of the U.S. men's national team discourse even before he was hired. That was just all anybody wanted to talk about. The guy has become such a central figure for conversation around the U.S. men's national team. It's a bit disappointing because the U.S. is coming off of this Nations League tournament with probably the best roster we've ever seen. One of the best performances that we've ever seen from the United States. I mean, I believe that the Mexican coach said that after. I think John Herdman said that as well after the game. And a lot of the fan base is having trouble enjoying it because of just the disdain for Greg Berhalter. I honestly think it's going to be business as usual. I think it's not going to be, even though the U.S. Soccer came out and said this is not business as usual. I think everything's going to be fine. I think that the relationships will be able to be repaired. I think everything's going to be okay moving forward. As far as how the U.S. is going to play in the Gold Cup, if you recall in the last Gold Cup, the U.S. actually came out in a lot of different formations. I mean, they ran a back three for a little while. They came out in a two-striker formation with Giassi Zardes and Daryl Dike. They kind of moved around all over the place. I don't recall if we even settled on a 4-3-3 at any point. I mean, that 4-3-3 didn't really emerge until after the first window of World Cup qualifying. I think I don't remember exactly when it really became that. I think the MMA midfield, we first saw it against Jamaica in World Cup qualifying, and then that's sort of where it really solidified, and they just started working on that from then on out. But prior to that, the U.S. was doing all kinds of different stuff stylistically. As far as how the U.S. is going to line up, I think it's a really interesting question, because if you look at these U.S. men's national team roster heading into the Gold Cup, there's a lot of just bits and pieces and odds and ends and kind of a curious mix of players being called in. You got some guys who are sort of on the edge of the national team roster who we've yet to really see participate fully there. I'm thinking about guys like Alan Sonora, who's a midfielder that just keeps getting called into the senior squad, but we really haven't seen him play there. He's probably not quite good enough to crack that roster. But what will he do with the Gold Cup? Zendejas is another player that's kind of in that mix. Cade Cowell is a really interesting player. He's a really young player. He's just incredibly athletic and is at times unplayable, but at times is just Tasmanian devil out there kind of losing possession. He's often compared to Jordan Morris, who will also be on that roster. And Jordan Morris is still one of the top attacking players in MLS, and he'll give defenders fits. I'm very curious about the health of Miles Robinson. Miles Robinson at center back was one of the players of the tournament in the previous Gold Cup. He had a phenomenal game against Mexico. Goes down with an injury. If he's able to go Saturday, that's going to make it really difficult for any opposition to score on the U.S. Moving forward. Of course, Matt Turner is going to be in goal. There's guys like Brian Reynolds who are in this squad who are having big seasons in Europe. Brian Reynolds got the big move over to Roma from FC Dallas, but just didn't quite work out there. He kind of got bounced around and is at some of the lower tier leagues in Europe and is kind of trying to move his career back up. Jesus Ferreira and Brandon Vasquez up top are options that have really been scoring a lot of goals in MLS. Brandon Vasquez, a big, strong kind of target striker, and Jesus Ferreira, kind of the exact opposite of that, a really cerebral player who can kind of drop in, pick those runs. He can drop back and sort of operate as a 10 in that midfield. Speaking of 10, Jordi Mihailovic is a player that was on the cusp of making the World Cup roster in 2022 before getting an injury, and kind of that derailed his opportunity to really go to the World Cup. I mean, there's a lot of guys who have really interesting stories who were kind of on the cusp of the senior team roster and either are getting opportunities to show what they can do in this tournament as young players, or they're maybe older players that are getting another opportunity to kind of get back in that conversation with the senior squad. It's a really interesting group, and I've seen fans kind of project different rosters and just put together a bunch of different 11s. There's a bunch of different ideas out there of how this team could play. So I'm really interested to see what happens. Are we going to have to be relying on some of these veterans because some of these young players just don't quite make the grade in the tournament? Is going to be one of those things where we see some of these young players get better throughout the tournament and become bigger impact players as we move on? I mean, there's just a lot of different ways that we can go with this. This isn't a group that we've really seen play before, and this isn't a group that we really have a lot of ideas about what exactly is going to happen when we get together. But I think the high end of this thing is very good, but the low end is like, okay.
And I mean, that's the exciting part. And I can feel your excitement, Sam, because I think that the U.S. fans and the Canadian fans should look at this tournament as an opportunity for players to take a big step up, because you never know what's going to happen. And literally 2 years ago, a bunch of Canadian players, a bunch of American players did that step and are now vital parts of their national team. So I think that's a good way to potentially end off this video. I want us to all go around I know, Sam, you just named half the team, but you got to pick one now. I need you to pick one player. I want Alex to do it as well, and I will, from the team that you think is going to have a breakout tournament that could potentially lead to them becoming a regular in the national team. So, Alex, what one player do you have your eye on and why?
Oh, just one, hey?
Just one. I know. I can't do what Sam did. You got only one. Only one player.
Well, I'll throw a quick wink to Brim, who I mentioned earlier. But if I'm looking at one who you're looking at in terms of what could help Canada, I'd like to see Moise Bombito really just get this opportunity. Because, look, I think the fact that he got called in so last minute to the Nations League, gets called in again to the Gold Cup where, guys like McNaughton are doing well, Hebert, I think that's a sign of confidence. And Bombito is still, rather young for a center back, 23, just in his first pro season. He's adapted very quickly to the level, a highly touted prospect out of college. And just from what I see, he has tools that not many center backs in this Canadian pool have, like a mix of size, speed, and an ability to play the ball. Like, it always feels like with Canadian center backs, it's two of the three. It's never all three in one package. And he's a right footer who can also play on the left. Like, I think he just ticks so many boxes for someone we talk about Canada needing that center back group. I feel like he's someone, if he can get that opportunity and show he can play at that level and he can build off that in MLS, he's someone who could quickly sneak into that pool ahead of 2026. So I'll go Moise Bombito.
See, I thought you were going to go with Ali Ahmed. I thought you were going to throw a wink over to Brim and go with Ahmed, but
Ahmed's definitely in there too. I mean, that one kind of speaks for itself. Right?
Yeah,
like he's just midfield. Could be a fun Kone Eustachio trio with Ahmed.
I got Alex excited, but no, I'm glad you went with the center back position because that's where I'm going to look, and I think it comes at the right time for us both to look at center backs because of the match against the US. I think we can probably all three of us can debate that's where a lot of the issues happened. I think Steven Vittoria will be a lot more difficult to replace than we thought. He's 36 years old. There's no way he's playing, or at least he shouldn't play every single match in this upcoming Gold Cup, which tells me that there's an opportunity there. Whether Canada lines up in a back four or a back three, I think the dual national, he was eligible to represent the U.S. He's now representing Canada. Zach McGraw has a big opportunity to step up and show, all right, a year from now, maybe 2 years from now, when Vittoria is probably done with the national team, I can slide in there. He's got the size, he's got the profile, he's having a very good season right now with the Timbers. He's going to be very new to this system, so maybe it's not fair to expect him to come right in, but because of the center back depth, and if Herman does go with a back three and Vittoria maybe played that first match, there's an opportunity there for McGraw or someone to step up, and I don't see why it wouldn't be him. Herdman and company chased him. They got him now to represent Canada, and there's a huge opportunity that I think he could have a big tournament. 26 years old, playing well, and I think he could be one for the future for Canada, even though he is 26. But he's coming in at the right time, at the right opportunity to potentially take this spot from Vittoria. So, Sam, I gave you some time to think about it. Who is your one guy from the U.S. that you think that the Canadians should be scared of and who could potentially have a big tournament?
I mean, the one guy the Canadians should be scared of is probably Canadian-American Aiden Morris, who is out there. I don't know what exactly he's going to do in this tournament, but he's a young player that's in a position where a lot can happen in his career. He could end up on the senior team, or he can end up in Europe. He could kind of continue on where he is right now. Not sure. But as far as the one guy I'm really watching from this U.S. team, and it's a guy that's really controversial in the U.S. circles, but he's one of my favorite American players to watch. I'm going with Jesus Ferreira, man. The striker for FC Dallas. He's a name that if you mention it in U.S. soccer circles right now, you'll just get a lot of hate and dismissal because whenever he was called up during World Cup qualifying in the previous cycle, he missed some chances and some big opportune moments and kind of got just absorbed the brunt of a lot of pain that the U.S. fan base had because we just didn't really have a lot of striker options that were putting the ball in the back of the net. However, I mean, you fast forward to right now, he's having a ridiculous season from FC Dallas. He's coming off of a ridiculous season for FC Dallas. He's one of the leaders in MLS as far as goal scoring. And if you consider that list of the top scorers in MLS, you're looking at a lot of DPs, a lot of top guys who were brought in internationally. Jesus Ferreira is a homegrown talent. He's 22 years old. So he stands out among that group. I'm excited to see what he can do with this Gold Cup opportunity. This might be a level where he can come out with 4 or 5 goals for the U.S. and maybe not put himself in the conversation for striker because I don't know that he can do that for the senior squad still playing in MLS. He probably needs to make the move. But at least maybe begin to sort of change that narrative, have fans kind of soften on him a little bit, and maybe show what he can do internationally and kind of grease the wheels to get that move to Europe. I know I'm super biased because he's one of my favorite players to watch, but I'm going to go with Jesus Ferreira.
That's totally fair, but that is all the time we have on this preview. A big shout out for Sam for coming on. This was a lot of fun. Best of luck to the US, Jamaica, Mexico, Canada. It should be a very fun tournament, one where I think the opportunity, like I said, that is what we should focus on. The opportunity is there for players to take a big step up. But if you guys did enjoy this preview, as always, be sure to drop a like, drop a sub, and we'll see you guys soon. Cheers, friends.